Welcome to the Intelligence Preparation of the Battle Space lesson of the Operational Concepts MAP module. Intelligence Preparation of the Battle Space, or IPB, is the dynamic process of analysing the environment and enemy to determine their impact on the mission. It is performed by intelligence staff and is the most time-consuming of the steps in the process. A well-completed IPB provides a sound basis from which to apply own capabilities to defeat the enemy. IPB consists of 4 steps. The first 2 steps relate to analysing the environment, and the second 2 relate to analysing the enemy. Having identified the environment that needs analysis, the next step in the IPB sees the staff concentrate their efforts on describing the effect of it on own and enemy operations. Terrain analysis of the battle space is undertaken using the acronym OCOCA. OCOCA stands for the following components: observation and fields of fire, cover and concealment, obstacles, key and decisive terrain and avenues of approach. It's important for you to realize that OCOCA is simply a mnemonic. When analyzing the battle space, the components could be considered in any order. Consideration of one component may lead to another. For example, numerous potential key terrain may be identified first, combined with the consideration of cover and concealment through terrain hatching, obstacles and potential areas for observation posts, defensive positions with good fields of fire, suitable hides, FUPs, covered routes, landing zones, and so forth are identified. Most digital map data can now be interrogated to produce indivisibility overlays and observation arcs from key features. This information helps in the development of own and enemy courses of action for the positioning of observation posts, direct fire weapon systems and the like. Most digital map data can now be interrogated to produce indivisibility overlays and observation arcs from key features. This information helps in the development of own and enemy courses of action for the positioning of observation posts, direct fire weapon systems and the like. The degree of restriction to mobility is a tactical assessment. Because infantry can maneuver in most terrain, we generally view the restrictions on motorized or mechanized forces. By declaring an area unrestricted, we are implying that terrain does not hinder a motorized force by speed, frontage, or depth. Restricted implies significant constraints such that a force could not travel at the desired speed or in the desired formation. A good guide to restricted mobility is that a mechanized force would be reduced to a speed of between 5 and 15 kilometers per hour. Marking an area very restricted is declaring it to be marginally no-go. If a mechanized force were to use the area, then it would do so severely restricted by obstacles to a point that it could only travel below 2 to 5 kilometers per hour or on limited frontages. In this example, we may deduce the following areas to be restricted, noting the constraints imposed by slope, urban areas, and vegetation. Next, we identify the areas that are very restricted, and this leaves us with those that we believe are unrestricted. Having done the terrain hatching, we proceed to mark all other obstacles on the overlay. These may include rivers, lakes, defiles, and the like. For the attacker, key terrain relates more to objectives, FUPs, and depth features that could be used to block withdrawal. Having marked all key terrain, analysis can be undertaken to determine the decisive terrain, which is defined as key terrain that has an extraordinary impact on operations, such that the success of the entire operation depends on the seizure or retention of a single piece of ground. In defensive operations, determining decisive terrain can be influenced by three considerations. It may be chosen as the last piece of key terrain from which the mission can still be achieved, because there is one feature that is so dominating that its loss would undermine the defense, or there is a feature that dominates all routes that pass through the AO. The last element of terrain analysis is the identification of avenues of approach. These avenues are identified by first marking mobility corridors. Mobility corridors result from the restrictions identified when assessing terrain obstacles. Gaps between obstacles are marked and classified in terms of their ability to allow the passage of forces. This is usually a tactical assessment based on doctrine. For example, a gap of 1 kilometre between two areas of very restricted terrain would allow for the passage of a mechanised company in the advance or a battalion in the assault. Corridors are marked as follows, and their width capacity is recorded within the gap. When all mobility corridors are marked, then avenues of approach are formed. They are classified numerically, with 1 being the most likely and usually the best avenue. Avenues of approach and mobility corridors are usually coloured for the force with offensive manoeuvre. Thus they would appear red for the enemy or blue for own forces. Up until now, we have only created a combined obstacle overlay, or COO. In order to develop the modified combined obstacle overlay, or MCOO, we need to analyse the weather in relation to the effects of visibility, wind, precipitation, cloud cover, moonlight, starlight, tides, temperature, and other such effects. The effects may be shown on an overlay supporting the MCOO for precipitation or on a matrix for other effects. The overlay highlights the weather effects as being either favourable, marginal, or unfavourable for any given period. Other battle space characteristics not covered under terrain or weather are now analysed to identify their characteristics and effect on operations. These may include, and are not limited to, land use patterns, potable water, bulk fuel storage, transport systems, communication systems, road and rail networks, airfields, natural resources, power generation, and many other facilities. Population demographics, including living conditions, cultural distinctions, religious beliefs, political affiliations, languages, and movement patterns are shown. Local, regional, national, or foreign economic wealth and interests would also be shown. A host of political factors such as allegiance, government systems, boundaries, gangs, and tribes would be marked for analysis and highlighted on overlays or reports also. Although difficult to quantify and represent graphically, the staff should consider the electronic and information spectrum in terms of its impact on own and enemy operations. All terrain analysis results are now aggregated to produce the COO. Additional to those elements we have just discussed, the COO may also include engagement areas, counter-mobility obstacles, and objectives if they have been deduced. Your COO might appear like this. Note how it graphically represents the effects of terrain such that we could later develop enemy courses of action and own course of action concepts. The coup is a useful tool to help determine the effect of the environment on enemy and own force tactics and doctrine. The terrain and its analysis undertaken during this step of IPB largely determine how we develop courses of action. As recorded by one famous historian, don't ever let the ground stand in the way of a good plan. Analysis of the enemy is the most difficult step in the process. It's the one area around which most information is missing and therefore carries the greatest risk. Despite this, a thorough analysis can often predict enemy actions, allowing for the preparation of counter-moves. This is the essence of the maneuverist approach and a key feature of the MAP. There are 3 activities performed during this step. Identify the enemy level of command, establish enemy models, and identify enemy capabilities. Planners determine the level of command that is being shaped by analyzing the higher commander's assessment of the enemy. To aid this assessment, you should consider answering a set of guiding questions. Given combat ratios, it's unlikely that a force would shape the same level of command that is being shaped by their higher commander. Sometimes it's useful to construct a hierarchy of objectives for the enemy and to match these against the higher commander's scheme of maneuver to determine the level that is being shaped. When this is done, it becomes clear whom you are shaping and the next level of enemy command you may influence. If we are to physically and psychologically shape an enemy commander and his force, then we should be clear who it is that we are targeting and what our actions may invoke as support by the next higher command element. During this activity, the staff gathers as much information on the enemy level of command and capabilities as they can. They seek to understand who the enemy is and how they fight. The high-value target or HVT matrix may be produced after identification of the centre of gravity if the staff wish to relate it to enemy critical capabilities. The development of doctrinal schemes of manoeuvre at this stage of IPB should not be confused with the production of enemy courses of action conducted in Step 4 of IPB. It relates more to the preferred enemy tactics from a doctrinal perspective and is not related at this early stage to the attainment of the assessed enemy mission. In practice, it's often better to complete this activity after the centre of gravity construct in the next step of IPB. This is because analysis of the centre of gravity identifies those capabilities critical to the enemy, and it is these that should appear in the HVT matrix. Known facts about the enemy are documented and interpreted to identify how the force will operate and where its weaknesses lie. Where possible, this information should be presented graphically, and the first 3 elements usually form the start state for enemy course of action assessments. 9 Mechanised Division is presently in Brisbane, consolidating after securing the city. The division is at 93% combat effectiveness and is capable of breaking out to resume the offensive in 7 days after resupply and detailed reconnaissance. The division is capable of advancing on 3 axes to contact Anzac Division defences prior to launching a deliberate attack using penetration. This may be supported by deep operations using reconnaissance forces, an air mobile battalion and defensive fire. This step relates to the art of assessing enemy intent based on having previously evaluated their capability. The outcome is to produce enemy courses of action shown as situation overlays. Another key activity in this step is an assessment of the enemy centre of gravity and its critical vulnerabilities, or CVs, as a basis for subsequent development of the decisive events, or DEs. There are 6 activities that may be undertaken when performing this step. This activity is the first in bringing the maneuverist approach into the planning process. It's through the centre of gravity construct that enemy vulnerabilities are identified for targeting and the shaping effect achieved when friendly courses of action are developed. If we are to shape the vulnerabilities of the enemy's centre of gravity, then it's crucial that we identify an appropriate centre of gravity. To aid you with this, you should consider asking the following two questions. First, what is the key capability or group of capabilities or locality that will allow the enemy commander to achieve the mission? And second, if I negate the effect of this capability, group of capabilities, or locality, will the enemy commander fail in the mission and will I achieve my designated end state? A yes answer to both questions provides an adequate start point for the identification of a centre of gravity. If a specific centre of gravity has been chosen, then the critical capabilities, or CCs, are those effects that the capability delivers to the battle space that makes it the hub of all power. For example, if the armoured regiment was chosen as the centre of gravity, the CCs could be firepower, manoeuvre, shock action, contingency, and the like. If a generic centre of gravity is chosen, then the CCs would be the individual capabilities that combine to give the effect. A generic centre of gravity of massing fires to penetrate a defensive line could have the following CCs: offensive support, or more specifically, the division artillery group, the counter-attack force, air assault, and the assault echelons. Critical requirements, or CRs, lie in both the physical and psychological domains. They are the critical components necessary in the battle space that enable a critical capability to function. There are requirements that remain extant regardless of the situation, and these include combat service support, protection, command and control, and the like. There are also CRs that are evident only in a particular tactical situation. Consider these examples. A single D-file to transit that is necessary as the only route to an objective, or a command trigger to activate an asset from its hide to the target. Detailed analysis of the requirements is essential as most vulnerabilities lie in denying the enemy access to them. Generally speaking, combat support and combat service support capabilities become requirements that support combat capabilities. Excluding offensive support, they don't usually deliver offensive capability or defensive capability to achieve the mission. Denying a combat capability, these assets can often leave it vulnerable. Identifying CVs is a tactical art. Sometimes they are inherent in the capability itself. For example, the limited optics in the T-72. On other occasions, the CV may be the result of employing the capability in the battle space and is derived when analysing the requirements specific to that battle space. For example, the channeling effects of a D-file. Finally, some CVs may have to be exposed by own force actions. For example, the early commitment of an enemy reserve achieved through deception. Planners need to identify sufficient CVs in order to disrupt or dislocate enough CCs that will lead to the defeat of the centre of gravity. Think of a house of cards analogy. By pulling a few cards away from the base, the whole house collapses. Situation overlays are constructed by melding the doctrinal overlay and the MCOO with the course of action concepts identified at the start of this step. Any dispositions are adjusted to fit the reality of the effects of the battle space, and current knowledge of the enemy is used to update the situation overlay. Each course of action is depicted as a separate situation overlay. When time is critical, only the most likely and dangerous courses may be developed. Each overlay should contain EAs, objectives, and the locations and activities of HVT. Additionally, the scheme of manoeuvre should contain likely phases and key activities, and key decision points should be identified. Step 5, each situation overlay depicts a possible course of action. The event overlay summarizes all courses of action through the allocation of named areas of interest, targeted areas of interest, and decision points, such that when the enemy plan unfolds, the staff can determine which of their estimated courses is unfolding, or indeed if an unexpected course of action is being executed. NAIs relate to the who, what, where, and when of the enemy. They can also be directed to the need for battlespace information. They are identified and drive the commander's ISR plan when converted to become priority information requirements. Having laid out a course of action on a situation overlay, the staff seeks potential areas where the enemy can be targeted when executing that course. These areas are designated as TAI. Remember that when constructing them, the effect is not only maneuver or offensive support. Targeting can include a host of other activities, including EW or PSYOPs. When developing an enemy course of action, the staff must determine the key decision points that the enemy must make to execute the course of action. Their identification helps to delineate between courses of action and branches within courses of action. Later, they can be exploited to confound the enemy, attack the command nodes used to pass them, or to reinforce deception objectives. You have been introduced to a situation overlay, which is the result of the enemy's doctrinal template being stretched over the MCOO in order to realize the effects of the MCOO on the enemy's doctrine. You have also been introduced to the event overlay. Consider this example to highlight the utility of the event overlay. In defining our battle space, we determined that our battalion has been allocated the following AO, and we are the Forward East Company. Our mission is to deny enemy penetration south of Northings 96 in order to turn the enemy west into the battalion's engagement area, EA Alpha. During our mission analysis of our battle space through the process of IPB, we identified potential areas that offer good observation and fields of fire and cover and concealment. We also identified areas that would impede mobility, including the Albert River, that could be reinforced into a complex obstacle. The combined effects of the mobility corridors primarily presented two avenues of approach. Avenue of Approach 1 is to the west of our AO, and the second avenue of approach is to the east of the first, through our AO. As a result of Step 3 of IPB, we are mindful that the enemy is predominantly mechanized, and we can expect nothing less than a battle group or battalion plus to attack us off their line of march. Given that the enemy's rate of advance is 12 to 15 kilometers per hour, taking this as the zero timeline, enemy armor would have entered EA Alpha in 30 minutes and be at their objective in 60 minutes. We must remember that our timescale is for enemy armor or mechanized forces. The infantry will need a different timescale. In order to ascertain the accuracy of our assessment of the enemy's selected course of action, it will be crucial to identify and monitor the route the enemy has chosen. In this instance, 4 named areas of interest have been identified that would later require tasking of ISR assets to closely monitor the situation. Monitoring of the situation may not be sufficient if the enemy does not do what we had anticipated. We may need to do something where the battle space affords us some sort of advantage to discourage him from taking the eastern approach or avenue of approach 2, so these become target areas of interest, or TAIs. Should he defy us and go along Avenue of Approach 2, we will need to activate TAI-2 in order to disrupt his momentum and gain time for our commander to implement a contingency plan. This could include the switching of the battalion's main effort into Avenue of Approach 2 and the activation of the reserve. This is now the event overlay, constructed during IPB and updated during course of action analysis. Now, that will not be the end of IPB. It will continually be updated as the situation develops, and various agencies are tasked to acquire more information upon which to base future options. This now concludes the intelligence preparation of the battlespace lesson. It's important for you to realize that IPB is a continuous process. There are 4 key elements in the process. 2 relate to the analysis of the battlespace, and the other 2 to the analysis of the enemy. The tools and products that are produced in IPB enable us to determine the effects of the battlespace and enemy on the forthcoming operation. Remember that IPB is an ongoing process throughout the MAP, and it must be updated as new information or deeper analyses come to hand.